So I didn't have a script for this.
No worries. We should just start by saying thank you, Ashley, for making the time to come by. Really excited to hear from you. And yeah, I happy to go with whatever format you'd like. We were gonna have people send questions for a later portion of the event, like a Q&A section in the Q&A channel. Does that
Mhm.
seem
Where do you have that?
good for now?
Yeah, I don't know if I see the Q&A channel.
I don't see it either.
It's just above the voice channels.
Oh, Q&A. There you go.
There it is, yeah.
Okay, you see
Sure.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this just kind of conversationally if you wanna, ask questions and I can talk about game dev or cinematics or narrative or whatever. I'm happy to give any knowledge or insight that I can. But hi, I'm Ashley. I am the narrative director on Star Wars: The Old Republic, and I'm happy to be chatting with y'all.
So Ashley, I wonder if you could tell us just about your oh,
And well, okay, wow,
I guess
amazing
he, I
interview,
guess
guys.
he couldn't.
Amazing interview.
we can hear you, can't see you yet.
Okay.
There we
My
go.
whole
Oh,
Discord,
there we go.
shut down and restarted. That was really weird.
Oh no.
I'm back.
A
I
good
don't know if it's
start.
related, but it seems like there's been a bunch of internet spikes going around in the area. I don't know if that might be something going on with the weather.
So I just wonder if you could tell us sort of about your arc in the industry, where you started, where you've been, where you're at now. Take us on that journey.
Yeah. It is very niche and weird, and uh, I think the overarching theme of it is that everybody has their own path, and it is impossible to follow anyone through their path because time changes everything. And time also changes what jobs are relevant in the industry. So I went to school at DePaul University in Chicago. I was an animation major, and I was really interested in character stories and character animation. And my school had a game program that was in the same building. It was in the computer building, and I only started looking at games around my senior year, uh, and seeing like where I could apply my art skills. I knew a little bit of Maya, and that not many people are doing like super in-depth narrative or animation stuff. So I was like, oh, where can I kind of fit into this? It was also really hard because I never felt quite accepted in the game clubs. Like I was hanging out in the game spaces, but it was still extremely gendered. I was like one of two women in a huge group of guys, and casually, jokingly making "make me a sandwich" jokes was still a thing, and it was just grating. It was that sort of like so easy to have your cool card revoked at any second if you ever disrupted their vibe. Um, it was actually when I played Mass Effect that I discovered Mass Effect my sophomore year, and I that game like really hit a chord with me where I realized, like, especially when like Shepard becomes a Spectre and is standing in front of the council and everything, it touched me in a way I was like, this feels like I'm powerful, like it's part of my own life, and it made me feel like I could do great things. I could be a part of something bigger. I could work in games, but also it was also a kind of a light bulb moment. I was like, this game made me feel this way about my life. I could do that for other people. I can make other people reflect on their own life through the things that I create. So it kind of gave me a kick in the butt to keep reaching for stuff even when there was adversity and just struggle there. Um, I ended up being a part of a student project. They had like kind of a pseudo interviews in the school to be part of this team called the DePaul Game Elites, where we were making a game specifically for the was it IGF, the Independent Games Festival, in the student showcase. And we made this game called Devil's Tuning Fork, and that was a fun game to work on. And it was interesting because I actually applied for the like narrative director on that game, and didn't get it. And but then later the faculty advisor asked me to edit all the scripts. So after they were written by the other guy who was picked to be narrative director, he's like, "Hey, could you edit these before they go to the voice actor?" And I was like, "Sure, that's fine." um, but we did get into the showcase, and that was a really great experience. But going to GDC was also huge because it gave me perspective on the game industry in general, and it also gave me this moment of like, oh god, I am not ready. I was still looking for animation jobs, and I was looking at my reel, and I brought my reel to some professionals there, and they tore it apart, totally justifiably, but it like gave me somewhere to grow because I was like, I'm not ready, but here's how I know I can get there. So then after I graduated, I actually, did not find a job for a while. I was applying all kinds of places with animation. Um, didn't get any leads until somebody that I met at GDC was like, "Hey, we're hiring cinematic designers for this game, Star Wars: The Old Republic," and I'm like, "What's a cinematic designer? I've never heard of that." It's such a weird thing, but it's like a combination of filmmaking and editing and directing, placing animations from a library into a timeline to make characters act, to voice lines, setting all the cameras, setting different cameras and animations for different dialogue choices, making sure everything flows together well. And I applied with my animation reel and got a contract position at Bioware on Star Wars: The Old Republic for the first year, so at launch, which is super, super cool. Like lots of hype, lots of EA money and parties and stuff because it was like the year it was launching. Um, and it's kind of probably good that my contract ended because they did have a ton of layoffs after I left. So I was on a year contract, and I left a couple months after the game launched. I went to Tryon Worlds in San Diego, worked on the MMO Defiance, which the lead cinematic designer there had been at BioWare, so it was like similar pipelines. And I was like, oh, cool. And the running theme of this is that cinematics is different at every studio does it a little differently. So it's kind of like you come in with the skill set and not necessarily the tools because all the tools are different. Crunched pretty hard on that. Got laid off. Went to Telltale after that. Went there for 2 years, and did cinematics for a bit, and then was tapped to direct. So a lot of the directors, they're episode directors and season directors, and they usually come out of cinematics. And so I was assistant director on episode 1 of Tales from the Borderlands, and then directed episode 3, and which was a really great experience because it gave me a lot of perspective on leadership, on stress, on balancing the demands of a corporate executive level with the health of the team, and being that like in between, trying to make sure to keep the team safe while also meeting creative goals. But after about 2 years there, I was like, this is unsustainable. This is not healthy. I need to get out. Came back to Austin, worked on SWTOR again for another year contract, then worked a year remote for Telltale, then worked at Gunfire for 2 years, working on Remnant from the Ashes and Darksiders as a cinematic/narrative designer. And yeah, it definitely wasn't my kind of game there, and I wasn't really happy with the culture there either. But then a cinematic designer position opened back up. A full-time cinematic designer position opened up on SWTOR, and I was like, yes! I finally got to jump on that. And I was also like, I was contacted by somebody who was on the team, like, hey, this role is opening up, because I still had those connections from the team, and they were like, you're really good. We want you back. And then within a year, everybody else on the cinematic team left, and I became the de facto lead. We hired 3 more cinematic designers. I was lead cinematic designer for a year. And then this year, a creative director left, and he tapped me and said, you are going to be the narrative director. And I was like, okay. So it's all been a little wild, and it's funny because it's been like feast and famine throughout my career. Is that there were moments where I was unemployed for several months. There were moments where I was laid off, moments where I wanted to be full-time but was stuck in contract, or places that I felt like I was gaslit or didn't get the didn't get the feedback that I needed to grow. or the space to grow, because of certain leadership and company structures. And now I'm in a much healthier place, and I get to shape the culture from my position in leadership. So my goal is not only to make a good game, but to make everybody coming up through the company feel supported and want to work at the company. So yeah, that's my journey so far.
I really love that last point that you made about just wanting to make it a better culture from your position, especially just considering even what you said about work cultures that you didn't enjoy. I don't know, being able to like make that change that you yourself needed, and people coming into the industry need. Like there's like a lot of crunch, or that's what we hear on this end of
It's
things, and
definitely going out of vogue.
that's good. Right? Is that good?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
No, it's incredibly good. I think there was always this acceptance that it's like, oh, well, if you're not passionate, if you're passionate about the thing, you'll crunch on it. And I don't think that makes for a better product. And I think some of it is just coping mechanisms where you're like, well, I have to justify why I did this to myself. And if it wasn't for something that was grand and perfect and like a total like worthy thing for my time, why did I do it? And it can make you really sad about it. So I think that glorifying crunch is a way of coping with the fact that it hurt you physically and mentally. Um, but the more we can like step back and go, no, you can be passionate about a thing and also have a life. You can actually become a better artist and a better developer by having a rich, full life of other things because you don't burn out on the thing that you love. Um, I think that's becoming more a focus in the industry. And then like when somebody comes on Twitter, some CEO is like, yeah, crunch is how you get a great game made, they get roasted. It that didn't happen 10 years ago. So it's becoming more of a thing of like, no, 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 we do like we definitely don't celebrate it, but we are getting to the point where like we're weeding it out of our culture and just having better production practices in general.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Have
Who,
you had a lot? Have you had a lot of practice?
Practice
Yes.
doing what?
Like like have you had a lot of practice? Have you had a lot of practice with your design work that you did?
Jeez.
Yeah. I think you mean like my cinematics or narrative
Yeah.
design?
Have you had a lot of practice with those types of things, such as cinematics?
Yeah. I mean, I've been in the industry about 11 years now, so the volume of work, I always think the more you do a thing, the better you're going to get at it. Um, but that my practice has come through the work that I've done, and the ones like upside to Telltale was that we were always working, and their games, each episode was like 2 to 3 month production, and so I released over 20 episodes in 2 years, um, and that was a lot of work. So I did a lot of like character staging, animations, camera angles, emotional tone, emotional drive, um, and yeah, just getting a lot of opportunities to play with scene work in general and like delivery of narrative visually. So yeah, a lot of practice.
Very good. Very good.
We've got some questions coming in the Q&A
Mhm.
channel. I've got the first one. During your time between jobs, what would you say is the best way to spend that employment time? Working on bolstering your reel/portfolio or networking/building your list of contacts?
Mm. I'd say both, but leaning more towards real. Um, and it depends on the kind of field that you're going into, right? Like I in recent years, for artists, like having an art station and constantly updating that of, hey, this is a thing I'm working on. This is what I was challenging myself to do. This is where I'm trying to go creatively. Um, building out a real show's drive. It shows that you are trying to grow as an artist outside of requirements, outside of an assignment. And it is a little bit of a big ask. It's a big ask of yourself to like make all this stuff when you're not making it for someone, but it is a good way to show that you are trying to expand your creative skills. And then also on top of that, always asking for feedback. Sometimes just reaching out to developers and like, hey, could you review this? No strings attached. I just would love feedback. And then being able to take that feedback, polish it up, and go, hey, is this better? Is a huge thing to be able to like, oh, look, this person took feedback. They understood what I was asking, or they understood like my impressions of it. They took that feedback and made it better. I think that connecting with people like I talk about GDC. I volunteer at GDC with the conference associates, and I'd say that's probably my biggest network of people. And it's not necessarily that I'm looking for the brightest or the most famous people in the room. I'm usually looking at my peers. Like the best networking you can really do is the people beside you, because in 2, 5, 10 years, you don't know where you'll be, you don't know where they'll be, and uh, it's a small industry. So that's networking for me is just making sure I maintain those connections and like friendships, and being being open to hearing what other people are doing and really like inquisitive and curious, but not necessarily like trying to climb, just kind of being a part of a community. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I sort of building on that, the idea of connecting in the industry and just maintaining, being current with like your peers and everything. We have another question that asked, would you say it's harder to get a job in the game industry now compared to when you first broke in?
Yeah, I think that the obstacles are different. Um, when I started, game design schools were barely a thing, so there was a lot more hiring outside of game design schools, or just hiring outside of game development degrees. So you were getting people from all walks of life. I think one of the hard things now is that we have a lot of different schools, and we have we have space to build an industry from schools, but the problem is that our industry is not unified in how we make anything. Everything is like reinventing the wheel, like every single like studio. I joke that like with film, you don't have to reinvent the camera every time you go to a movie shoot. But that's what game studios do. They like everything is NDA, everything is like maybe it's Unreal, but it has a ton of custom stuff on top of it. Um so I think what's frustrating, or what can be frustrating now, is that you can go to school to get a degree in game development with all the tools that you think you'll need, and they're not what the studios are looking for. So when the degree feels like it should be like a technical degree or a vocational degree, it is more like a fine art, like a portrait artist degree, where it's like there's no guarantee that you will be slotted into work after you get this degree. It's more like you try to hone your skills in a way that makes you stand out. But yeah, I don't know. It's On the other hand, we have a ton more game studios and a much broader array of indie to AAA to everything in between. So there are a lot more jobs and opportunities to find out there all over the world. And now a lot of them full time remote, so you don't even have to move. Like I moved across the country 6 times for work, and now a lot of places you could just work from wherever you are. So yeah, I think it's definitely it's different. It's still hard, but it's definitely different struggles.
Makes sense. I'm curious if there's something that you see in the people who are coming in the entry level jobs on the specific project that you work on right now. If there's like any specific traits that you feel make them stand apart from other applicants, and things that you would say to people who are sort of in our position,
Mm,
like who will be, we're all at different points in the degree plans, but like maybe in a year we'll be applying to things and trying to be as competitive as we can.
hmm I'd say have a strong voice, and by that I mean have a good understanding of what you're passionate about and really showcase that in whatever portfolio or reel that you build. Um, because I think the biggest thing that we're looking for is that what you're creating comes from the heart, or it comes from some part of you that demands to be created, that demands to be out in the world. And that doesn't necessarily need to be something artistic. That could be like, man, I love organizing a team. I love making sure that everybody is on the same wavelength and everybody's informed, and really just finding the thing that makes you smile when it goes well, and and showcasing that in your portfolio, in your resume, in your cover letter. Um, and then the other thing is the magic factor is trying to find how that aligns with the needs of a studio. Because very rarely at this point in our industry are people looking for a generalist or someone, unless it's like a really, really small company, but they're usually looking for experienced people for that. So it's making sure that whatever you create is aligned creatively, and or is just aligned creatively with the studio that you want to work at. So like in the artist example, if you're applying to work on a Call of Duty game, you don't have cartoony stuff in your portfolio. Or if you do, you split it into a different portfolio, and you're just laser focused into like, I want to work on realistic weapons, on realistic vehicles. Here's my portfolio specifically for that. Because it's studios are definitely looking to fill a need, and the more you can think about, okay, how can I shape my drive and my passion to fill a specific need, and know where stylistically I think I fit the best, then that your chance of success goes up. Because like, I don't think I personally would do well on working on like a Dark Souls game. That's not really my vibe. That's not what I'm good at. Um, but something that's more like, silly, happy, hopeful, adventurous, upbeat, positive, that's more my vibe. So those would be the studios that I would focus on, and I would focus my portfolio when I apply to them.
Is there anything you need to learn in order to be successful at something? You is basically my question is there anything you need to learn to have a knowledge of this type of work?
Hmm. It's a broad question. Um, I think it's just a lot about asking. When you apply, when you talk to developers, me here, and reaching out to companies and saying like, say you don't get chosen for an opportunity, being like, thank you for the opportunity to
I
apply.
mean,
What can I do better in the future, or what are you looking for? That kind of stuff.
if there is,
If there is what.
I don't know if the connection went out there. I wonder if we might change gears a little bit. and sort of I thinking about finding, you know, your a job that allows you to tap into your skill set and sensibilities, either as like an artist or as a designer. You know, you came back to SWOTOR several times because clearly it was a good fit for you. And I'm just curious what this new role looks like for you, and sort of how cinematic design like took shape for you across the years, how you found yourself like growing within that role, and then what the new role looks like.
hmm Yeah, like I said, I didn't go to school for cinematics. I kind of fell into it, but it was something that my animation reel allowed me to apply for because of the um, I had camera work, I had uh, character emotions and acting and stuff like that in my reel, so it was something that I could use when I applied for cinematics. And I think what the the thing that I learned to carry with me when I was looking at jobs was that I need to look less at the actual job title and more about what is my core. Like, what is the core thing that motivates me? And it started out with I want to I want to tell stories about people, and I want to tell emotional stories about people. That can be applied to a bunch of different kinds of jobs. And so that gave me the flexibility to apply myself to seeing myself in different roles. Because at first I was like, no, I'm an animator. I'm not a filmmaker. I didn't get a film degree. I don't know what I'm doing. But the fact that I was like, no, I'm a person who wants to tell character stories, and I have a strength in understanding emotional journeys and emotional impact helped me be more flexible with the jobs that I could see myself doing. Um, and even like when I went to Tryon, our tool was still getting ramped up, so I had like a crash course on filmmaking while I was there. I got this video series called Hollywood Camera Work, which is super dry and very hard to watch, but it is so informative of like a camera angle moves like this, and all the characters are like 2001 3D models just kind of floating through the space, but the camera movement and the camera framing tells a lot of story, and it tells a lot of emotion with these dead face characters, because they're like the camera itself should be telling the story, should be shaping the emotions. And that was a great lesson when I was that I studied there, and like read a bunch of books, but basically just tried to get better at filmmaking on my own, and studying that stuff. Um, and then I think, especially with my work at Telltale, I got to reflect a lot more on not just visual storytelling, but also player choice and player intent. And I think that really opened up my perspective on the player as a storyteller. The big thing that makes us different from just movies is that we have another person in the space that is part of the story, gets to interpret the story. Um, and I believe that anytime you have any amount of choice or like customization of your character or anything like that, you are investing a part of yourself into this digital character. So then the story automatically means more to you. The interactions mean more to you because they are uh, an extension of you, even in the smallest amount. Even if it's a character that isn't like you at all, it is you reflecting on like, well, why am I not like that? Like, why am I playing a different kind of character? I do that when I play my Sith. I play a Sith warrior in SWOTOR, and she's just bloodthirsty as all hell. And I'm like, I'm not like that in real life, but this is a part of myself I like to explore. um, in a narrative form, in a safe way, where it's like, no, I'm not going to go rampage out in the wild, but this is a fun thing to learn about myself. um so yeah, at Telltale, I think I because of the volume of work and the choices, and also that we were very focused on trying to make every big choice have like a 50-50 split, where we want people to be very divided in how they chose what direction they go. It it really gave me space to think about like player expectation and how to shape a choice before you get to it to make it feel like the player really is divided of like, I don't know which way to go. And how to make every camera feel like it's your perspective, it's the player's perspective, and that I'm kind of gently guiding the player's motivations, but that I'm giving them the space to feel like they're role playing, that they get to improv in the scene a little bit. Um, and then on top of that, with SWOTOR, I like to create stuff that is also leaving more space for the player to yes and. So it's sort of like headcanon a lot of stuff. Um, things like if you have a character that's like does something, shoves you like, hey, watch where you're going. And then you cut to a reaction shot of the player. And it's not like, the player kind of looks over and looks around. There's so many different things you can project onto what the player character is thinking. And then the player can be like, oh, my character's pissed off about that. Or like, oh, my character's scared about that. But giving more visual space for the player to interpret the story and the narrative on their own, in their own way, I think makes it incredibly personally impactful. And that's kind of been my new, North Star, is that I'm trying to find this balance between telling a really compelling narrative that also leaves space for the player to project their own story and experience into the game, because I know that will make a richer experience for the player. But ultimately, like, the thing I always tell myself is the game narrative should be a dialogue between the creator and the player, that you are never trying to tell them exactly what they're doing or who they are or what their motivations are, because that's not the point of a game. The point of a game is to give people space to play and to yes and into the situation and to choose to be a part of it.
Excuse me.
Mhm.
So, is there, when doing the industry, is there anything needed to be learned to be able to do the job correctly?
It really depends on the role. Um, it depends on uh, what job you're applying for, but I think in general, a an understanding of how you fit on the team and where you sit in the department structure. I have a cat coming. Hold on. Come on, bud. The cat's gonna jump up in a second. Um,
It's just how you fit on the
there's
team.
yeah, and I think understanding like pipelines and also the phases of work, like being able to work from a block out to polish, being able to get ideas working when they're simplified before they get detailed, communicating creatively between multiple people, and understanding like how another thing I always say is experience always trumps intent. So if you have a play test or you have someone experiencing your story and they're like, that felt weird, you never go like, oh, but you're playing it wrong. It's like, no, the player's always right. Not not that they're always right, but that their experience is always valid. And so understanding how to take feedback like that, especially from your coworkers, and be like, okay, how do I adjust my creation to better match the experience to the my intent?
That's very cool. And one day, I am working to be a coder for games, hopefully.
Cool.
But yes, that's that's interesting to know. It's just working with the team and getting to know how everything works, huh? Pretty
Mhm.
much.
And just a reminder, everyone, questions can go in the Q&A channel. Just in case I had missed saying that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about guiding player choices and leaving room for players to make decisions, or for them to create stories that feel like their own, even if you, the designer, know that they're like actually following a specific path.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
About that.
I think the first step is understanding how much freedom you want to give the player, like how much affordance do you want to give them, and being very upfront about that with your players from the very beginning, because I think there's no wrong way to do choice, like depth or agency depth. Like every game is slightly different versus like a game that's just, straight through, does not change, characters don't change, versus like a completely open-ended text field where you could just enter in choices. Um, there are ways to make all of those work, but you first off have to communicate to your player from the very beginning what level of agency they can expect from the experience that you're building. The classic, Bioware style three choices is a nice model because it gives a certain amount of flexibility in how to roleplay your character without overwhelming you with a million choices and a million different personalities. Um, Also, like leaving a little bit of ambiguity between the choices and how they can be interpreted. Um, that can always lead to a discordant thing. Like you pick a dialogue choice and your character says a thing, and you're just like, "That's not what I thought that meant." Which is
Follow up.
something you get out with playtesting to weed that out. Um, but I think one of the things I think about a lot when we are forming choices is this a moment, that an interesting moment for the character to either, or the player to either role play the kind of character that they want to be in this world, um, build a relationship or break a relationship with a character that exists, or have like a big choice where you get to decide the future of whatever world you're in. But I think all of them need to reflect on the player, on the character that they're playing. Um, you gonna make a decision here? um, they have to reflect on role play. And so like a choice that's arbitrary that you haven't set up in any way, it's like, do you go right or do you go left? Does that mean anything for my character? Is that reflecting anything, like is that reflecting anything on character building? Um on choices like who lives, who dies? Have I spent enough time with each of these characters to build a relationship that I care about them? I care if they live or die. Would my character care if they lived or died? Um, Even like small choices of like, am I gonna dress like a fae or am I gonna dress like a punk today? Like those are still very valid choices. They're light, but they're role play. Um, so I think it always comes back to giving your players space to role play a character, and like every choice should be reflecting back on the character that you're building in the space. Um, from the developer side, I I guess it comes down to kind of reverse engineering it, of like, I want to build a moment where, let's use Walking Dead as an example. There are a lot of choices in there that let you build Lee as someone who is ruthless and ends justify the means. And the game gives you those options because it wants you to reflect on your relationship with Clementine, and that everything you do, everything you choose to do, reflects on her and how she sees the world and what she values, and like where her moral compass is. So the choices are designed to present you with that moral quandary without necessarily saying which one is the right one or which one is the necessary one. But the theme of the choices is that, are you going to be a good person that gets taken advantage of but wants to do the right thing and may end up suffering for it? Or are you going to be someone who will guarantee their survival but will be incredibly brutal to other people because your selfishness wins out in the end? Um, so if you can like think about the themes that you want the player to question about their character, or the way you want them to shape how they see their character's morality, how they approach the world. That's a great place to start with your choices, and then how you build up to those choices.
Totally. I love that
Um,
idea of like,
if there are different considerations in regards to whether or not the character is supposed to actually represent you versus you playing as a person, like in the Telltale example you gave, with Walking Dead in particular, where you're playing through the game entirely as Lee,
Mhm.
as like the player avatar, versus in a game like I guess SWTOR, where you make your character and that's supposed to literally represent like you in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, but even in SWTOR, you are representing an archetype. Like, you don't start with a blank slate. I mean, KOTOR is a better example of that, where everybody starts from the same starting point. You choose where you go from there. But in SWTOR, you're still picking from, like, I'm going to be a Sith, and so all my choices are kind of shaped towards being a Sith. And so, and everyone in my in my general vicinity understands, like, being bad is normal and being like evil and cutthroat is normal, versus if I'm playing a Jedi and it's much more noble and self-sacrificing, and there's still theme to those choices. But I think that, to your point, there's different levels of, like, are you playing an existing character versus are you playing someone that's more analogous to yourself. um I always like leaning more towards the stylization. I think that the more you can lean into a character that's semi-established, it gives more of a kickoff for the player to, like I said, yes and or improv into the situation. Like, you're given a prompt. What do you do with that prompt? Uh, do you go against the grain, or do you go with that prompt? Like, do you play a light side Sith? Do you play a dark side Jedi? Um, I feel like giving players a prompt to start from always lands with stronger narrative motivations right from the get-go, versus something that's like blank slate, pick whatever you want.
And I actually want to add on to that about player choice and the choices developers give to players. What about the choices that don't necessarily affect the player or their character, but affects the world around them, affects the environment, affects how the story proceeds, that don't necessarily impact you? You know what I mean? But they impact other things around you.
I think they still ultimately tie to what how you see your character. I mean, if you make
Okay.
a large choice, like, what kind of choice are you thinking about?
Not necessarily. I'm thinking of choices that necessarily would be like, because there's one that comes to mind where I think it was in an RPG. I believe it was one for where someone's daughter was either going to live or die, depending on what you did. It wasn't your daughter; it was someone
Mhm.
else within your cast, and basically you had to make a choice of whether to save them and risk something else happening in the future, or put them down now and make it a prop and make it to where if somebody else, I think, turns against you, and they become boss fight later. Like it doesn't like it affects you in that sense you have to fight the person, but it doesn't affect you in the sense of like your character's story arc. Because at the end of the day, it's not your family that's being lost. It's someone else within your party. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it still
Oh,
affects who your character is. Like, is
okay,
your
so yeah,
it still shapes who your character is by how they make that choice, and how
so
is
even
how
if,
is your relationship with that other person and that child, and like, that, like, are
okay,
you the person that will sacrifice more than is affecting you personally to protect someone that, that you don't have as much of a connection with, versus will you just let it happen?
okay, so basically, even if it doesn't affect your character directly, it still affects your character in a way that's like how your character will act around other people, or how your character basically is around other people. Is that what you're?
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. I think ultimately every choice should reflect back on your character of who they are, even if it doesn't affect them directly.
Okay, so the choices are not so what you're saying is the choices are not about affecting your character, but who your character is as a person, who you play
Yeah.
as,
Yeah,
the
that's
role
role
that they
play.
play. Okay, okay, that makes sense actually. It's like D&D essentially.
Mhm.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Just because it doesn't affect your character's resources or stats doesn't mean it doesn't affect your character's character in a more abstract
Mhm.
character. It may be some ethical sense or maybe not moral, but abstract kind of how you would describe a character, or maybe not an alignment chart, but in that other regard.
You
Yeah.
get
Okay, I get
this
that. Actually, that's a great way of putting it. I like that answer. Thank you.
So each character has their own type of personality, yes?
hmm And every player is going to see it differently. That's kind of what I love. I call them like headcanon conditionals, or stuff that isn't like contained within the game code, but the player internalizes it anyway. Um, like one of the things I loved about Telltale is like when you say something to a character and it says so and so will remember that. It doesn't tell you if it was positive or negative, but you get to choose how you interpret that, and you get to choose what your relationship is. Like it can sometimes be very obvious, like how they feel about something. But the choices that you make, if they don't have like a very clear like I'm sad now or I'm happy, and it allows you space to headcanon conditionals of who your character is and what choices they make. And then when you get to certain choices later down the road, you'd be like, well, my character would totally just pick this. Like and it's more like this character has come to life at this point. It's not just you making the choices. It's like, no, I've built this character by the choices that I've made. And in my head, there's only one right answer. There's only one way that they would go, because I've built this character that doesn't exist necessarily in the code, but exists in my head. That's the real magic to me.
That's like that's that's like create that's like creating an avatar with the type of personality.
Mhm.
Like creating your avatar, but with a different type of personality.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really cool. Like just for me in different types of media, like for me in different types of media such as anime, I enjoy that.
I feel like this is this question from the Q&A channel kind of dovetails nicely with this conversation. The question is, how much latitude do you get to shape the larger story? And what tends to be the best approach for constructing a narrative from the ground up, being structured or going by feel?
Hmm. Oh, it's for me personally, like right now, I get to I get some level of comfort because I get a lot of structure that's already been built beneath me. So I get to like build on that. I get to build on a legacy that already exists. Um, but if you're starting from scratch, I think I always just look at the why. Like, why am I telling this story? What do I want the player to feel? So in that case, it does start from feel, but starts from like player experience feel. What is the overarching like feel and aesthetic that I'm going for? And then I build a structure around that. And then always testing early, testing often to be like, am I following that? Am I following the why? Am I getting too in the weeds, or I've built so much backstory that no one's ever going to see? Or, am I getting to the point where I can see it on the screen? Um, so yeah, I think it's, and that kind of like goes along with game pillars. When you talk about like the a lot of studios do like game pillars. So like our game is these four pillars, like open exploring or exploratory content, you know, action, adventure, combat, da 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 da. Um, and I think approaching a story, I would think about what is the tone, what is like the first of all, what is the level of like dynamics of intensity of, is this sort of a light, woman finds herself while farming game, or is this a everybody's dying all the time and I'm just trying to get by game? Setting your narrative stakes and how intense you want that experience to be is a good place to start, and then staying consistent with that. Uh, but that also helps you shape like, okay, what is the feel? Do I want do I want players to feel like it's about connecting? It's about connecting with other people. Like Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley has a lot of different interactions with characters where you get to be part of a community, and you choose your level of involvement in that community. Um, do I want the player to reflect on their on relationships and how they make choices for people if those relationships are challenging, like Life is Strange. Life is Strange is a lot of like tough relationships with a friend who seemingly seems to self-sabotage, and you have to decide how you like interact with her and how you stay connected to her. um so yeah, thinking about stakes, thinking about theme, thinking about like how do I want the player to feel, and then building your structure around that, and then building a story around that.
Great answer. Um, do you get to do a lot of that sort of like in the weeds gameplay, player experience, story decision making in your current position? Or I know that are you also getting to like structure what this position looks like since, things have changed recently in the
Hmm.
like SWTOR makeup?
Yeah, definitely both. I so I have we have a lead writer who she heralds all the like nitty gritty stuff and the dialogue and the characters and all that. But she and I very much work in tandem where we talk about like my job is above that of like not more from like a what kind of content do we want to release, what kind of content do players expect, but then I can also think about the overarching like story arcs and character arcs of like where do we want that experience to go. I joke sometimes that I'm kind of a vibe check. I'm just like a vibe check on the room of like, where are we going with this? Is this something that players want? But it's nice to have that separation, because when you have someone that is in the weeds and gets into all the little details of how like lines of dialogue are written, and how files are structured and that kind of stuff, it's hard to context switch into the higher level of like what what is the ultimate feel for this moving forward. So I do have the option to come in and like I give feedback on all the scenes and the writing. I get less on I give less feedback on like grammatical structure and like lines of dialogue, but I'm more about I feel like the player's agency is taken away in this choice. Like, can we shift this dialogue in a way that motivates the player to get to say this rather than another character, because we want the player to feel cool. We don't want another character to have all the good ideas. Um, or like thinking about, hey, we want to set this thing up that's going to happen 2 years from now. Can we start to sort of hint at it like earlier on with this character? So it's more of a general vibe, detailed vibe, but just making sure that we're all like on the same wavelength, basically.
When you talk about like taking the SWTOR like community temperature, where do you get that feedback from? Is it like internal playtest communities, or are you guys like reading message boards, or how are you like getting that feedback, and then how much do you like incorporate that into your workflow?
I'm not like super into like if we do have analytics. I think analytics are probably a lot. They give certain amounts of feedback of like where do players spend the most time on planets, or what quests did they stop playing, or what characters get the most play. So there's data there that lets you know like where people tend to gravitate towards. um in terms of community like vibes, I kind of just look at I look at the forums, I look at Twitter, I look at Tumblr, I look at like just what catches people. I try not to focus too much on like anything that's negative or is just angry. Um and I focus more on like what what content caused someone to make fan art of it. Like where who felt so moved by this relationship or by this moment that they had to draw it or they had to write fan fiction about it. And that's where I'm like, oh, okay, that's where we've got them. Like we've captured someone there. I also love watching live streams and watching people play through the game and see how they experience it. Because I think there's a lot. I mean, there's sometimes streaming can be more performative than it is like actual feedback, but it's nice to sort of solicit that feedback in a way that they're not aware that I'm looking. Like I don't know if half the people know this. Like, oh yeah, a developer of the game is watching you play this. Um, but it's nice to just kind of lurk and see how people play the game when they, you know, aren't expecting to give feedback to the team, because it feels more organic and it feels like I can connect more with what people enjoy about the game, just watching it, out in the wild.
I love that idea of you watching people play SWOTOR, and them not knowing you're there.
Yeah.
Are you ever
I
in the
sometimes
chat?
feel like sneaky. I'm like, oh, they don't even know.
That's
uh,
amazing.
yeah. Our
Are you ever in
community.
the chat?
What?
Or do you ever, like, write to them as they're
Oh no, no.
like, "Go over
I
there."
No, no, I never give it away. I never like, because I don't want to change that dynamic. Honestly, like there are there are like SWOTOR discords where I'm like, I'm not going to tell them I work on the game. I just want to hang out and like talk about how we love SWOTOR, like because that it changes the dynamic, right? If they know you work on it. Um, our community manager, Jackie, though, she will hop into Twitch streams and just like give stuff away. And she shows up as the SWOTOR um, Twitch account, and she's like, "Hey, glad you're enjoying the latest expansion," and people are always excited to see her. So I like watching those, but I would never say like, "Oh yeah, I work on the game," and be more vocal beyond like my Twitter that has my title on there. Um, I do like to think that as I'm going through on Twitter and I see someone post some cool fan art, and then I just like it, that makes someone's day. That's that's my goal. Because I'm like, hey, this is neat art. Thanks for making it.
Yeah. Well, I wanna be mindful of your time too. I wonder if you maybe wanna look through the Q&A and see if there are particular questions that stand out to you, that you feel drawn toward answering?
Sure. I'm trying to see what I've already answered. Hmm. I can definitely touch on the since you're in a lead position, do you find yourself doing a lot more management than your traditional design animation work? What does that split look like? Currently, a lot of management, but it is something that I get to decide for myself. And my brain, especially right now, grabs onto the thing that is a solvable problem or something that's like, "Hey, I can do this right now." And it starts to push me more into a producer role rather than a creator role. And my responsibility as a lead is to properly inform the team and delegate tasks out so I do not become a bottleneck. Um, that and then I can delegate some of that stuff out so that I can continue to do the creative stuff. That's something I'm learning about this role in particular, is that it's so easy to grab the low hanging fruit of like, oh, there's like 5 Slack chats I need to answer right now. I don't I don't need to answer them right now. But because my brain sees a red mark and I'm like, there's like a serotonin boost there. Um, it's mindfulness. It's a lot of mindfulness of trying to figure out where, knowing that your attention and your focus is a finite resource, and treasuring it and making it precious and knowing where it needs to go, when it like where and when it needs to go, um, is incredibly important, and it's something I'm still figuring out how to do. So I think it is possible. um, my manager describes it as like there are leads and there are contributing leads. Leads are like everybody else does the work. I just make sure that everybody's working together and doing doing the work and that everyone's communicating and then contributing lead is someone who's like, I'm also creating while I'm leading. And I think I am more comfortable as a contributing lead, but it's something I have to carve that out for myself. And if there are certain things that I can't get to, I need to figure out how to delegate them to other parts of the team.
Is the team that you're working on, you've worked with them for a while now,
Mhm.
is that correct?
Yeah, actually, in August, I celebrated this is the longest time I've been at a company, 2 years, 5 months. And it's just going up from here. Meanwhile, like, people at Bioware are getting, service awards of, like, 10, 15, 20 years, and I'm like, "Oh, boy." Um, Technically, I've been at Bioware for 4 years interstitially, but 2 years, 2.5 years continuously.
I feel like
Yeah.
it must be I feel like it's an advantage to you, to be able to bring to your role, like, I don't know, just the pipelines from other studios and
Mhm.
getting to have, like, that outside perspective, or different takes on things, would only, like, sharpen you as someone at BioWare right now.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm very grateful I had all these different experiences, not only for the types of content and the pipelines, but also uh the team structures and the team cultures. I learned a lot about how to be a good lead by the many bad leads I've had at different companies, and um, I don't think anybody should go through trauma in order to be good, but it definitely shaped my career. And like there were moments like there were moments that I saw people really browbeaten and just not happy making games, not but knowing that that was all they could do, or like thinking, oh, there's nothing else I can do with my life because that's what I've committed to. And trying to realizing that as a lead, even if you do nothing, you are shaping someone. Like if your apathy can have negative impact, or your lack of action can have negative impact. Um, yeah, having that perspective from other studios, I think, has definitely made me a better lead here because it's stuff that I'm hyper aware of and very conscious of. Like we last year we had a contractor, um, and I was like, I want to get her converted to full time because I know what it's like to be a contractor. It sucks. It's hard, and especially if you really want to be full time. And it was only because I had been a contractor before that I had that perspective to bring to the table and to advocate for her. So yeah, I'm very happy that I have this breadth of knowledge, but I'm also really happy to stay here for as long as I can.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like one of the last times we talked, you had just mentioned that it's so nice working on a project like WOTOR where there is this like just open-endedness to it, because
Mm,
it's like, it gets added on to all the time.
yeah.
It's not going to be done at a certain point.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's a great thing about a live service is that it is continuously growing. And yeah, we're not like marching towards a finished game. We just get to keep updating the game that we have. And there's kind of an advantage to working on a game that's older, that isn't the new shiny, because there are less demands of you from higher ups and executives to be the big shiny. And so you get a lot more creative freedom to just kind of make things that you think would be good, because they're like, as long as you're making money, we're fine. So there's less pressure, there's less like edicts from above of your game needs to have A or your game needs to have these things. Because it is an ecosystem that has survived and it has continued on its own. And so it's kind of like a nice a nice thing to be in. And I joke that like that Swotor is my Hobbiton, that I went off to Mordor and saw the Eye of Sauron and did all this crazy stuff and then came back to Hobbiton, and it's not super exciting.
oh
What?
no,
Oh no! Oh,
I just got
oh.
disconnected. Thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
I
did
was
too.
gonna. Yeah. I was gonna make
Dang.
a joke about how it's your second breakfast, but I couldn't because they kicked me.
Yeah, we're already at like afternoon tea at this point.
Yeah.
Discord read your intentions of your joke and said no.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, I just
Oh,
I think that like and that brings me to just another like tip. Don't look at studios just for the games that they make. Look at it for the team makeup and the at least what they're projecting the quality of life, because like just because you like a game doesn't necessarily mean you want to work at that studio. Um
mhm.
like there's not, like, oh, I love Ratchet and Clank, I'm gonna go make Ratchet and Clank. You're not gonna like Ratchet and Clank after you make it. Not that I mean, not that you won't or that you can't, but you'll get to see more of it that may frustrate you and take away some of that magic. So
And
yeah.
because I wanted to ask a question about that actually when you said the whole working at studios.
Mhm.
I'm someone who actually is trying to make a game, someone who's trying to actually get into the I guess the what would you call it? The world of game design by just making my own game and doing it by myself.
Mhm.
What would you say as someone who basically is starting out making just one game? Just doing pretty much everything that I can. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like
Uh
what kind of advice or what would you tell that person or what would you tell them in order to kinda I guess give them the knowledge in order to like succeed in that field, especially if they're by themselves for at the moment.
Scope small. Um
Go small. Okay.
really scope small, and
Okay.
try to like I said, try to hone down on what it is you want the player to feel when
Okay.
they're playing your game, and then build your game around that, but in like the smallest microcosm. If it turns out you get more resources or people or more skill to make more, you can make it bigger later, or you can start over and build it better. But always build it out like a vignette. Um, it could just like if it's a story, it could just be a Twine game. It could just be a series of text boxes. Um,
Okay.
it's
So
yeah,
like,
just really if it's like if it's if you're trying to say like, oh, I want to create an experience like Breath of the Wild, for example, you're not going to make Breath of the Wild. It's enormous,
n-
and it took forever to make.
no, no, I
But
understand.
what parts of that experience are you looking for? Like, oh, I want something that feels big and expansive, or something that feels like I could go anywhere and do anything. It's like, all right, now
Yeah.
find the very specific details that you can pull from that make your development of it more efficient, but also get you to that feeling faster. So like
Okay.
dialing back, dialing back your quality of models or your rendering style. Um, really just
So
trying to
don't
find where those the specific bullet points are.
so don't create the next Final Fantasy 15 or next Fallout 70.
I knew
I got
somebody in school who had this idea for I forget what game he was trying to remake, but it was a JRPG, and he's like, "Ah, I just have this genius idea," and every year he said he was working on it and hacking away at it, and it just wasn't coming together, and it's like
yeah.
that's too big. And
Trust me, I know that feeling so much. I can relate because I've been doing that for oh my goodness since I was in high school. And
yeah,
it's just been eating away at my soul. Like I can't complete it. It's too much.
I have
Too
a
much.
a
Balancing alone in
poster.
a JRPG is just hell. It's really bad.
I have a
And
poster on my wall that says, "Fail faster. No ideas made fully formed. Your ideas can't be precious. Your ego can't need protecting. Every failure is a chance to get it right."
yeah, that
And
actually, yeah.
you just gotta make. Like, you just gotta make the thing and make, like I say, make mediocre art. Just keep making mediocre art. Don't feel like everything needs to be perfect. It's like you make a thing, you put it down, you make the next thing, you make the next thing, and you just keep going. And if there's something that really
Yeah.
grabs you, you can always come back to it later and make it again. But it doesn't need to be perfect now, because the problem is your vision and your drive may not match your skill set at the moment. But it's only through repetition and continuing to create lots and lots of things that you will suddenly find your skill set now matches your vision, or you have a better perspective on what you need and what resources you need, what team you need, what engine you need to build the thing.
Right.
You just don't know
Okay.
all of that, and even like trying to read and research as much as you can right now might not get you where you want it to be. So just taking small crumbs and building your way up.
Hey, that's good advice because again, been doing this for such a long time, and I've gotten somewhat a little bit ground, but I'm still not it. I'm still not making money, and I'm not even making money actually. I don't even have a product that's complete yet, not even out of alpha. I'm like,
Mm.
this is troubling.
Yeah, but you could create games that are like an hour long or 30 minutes long, and they're
Oh,
still
so
like completed games. If you can make an experience that's short and sweet and says a thing and doesn't overstay its welcome. I mean, honestly, now that I'm over 30, I'm like, I can't play a game that's more than 8 hours. It just doesn't fit in my
yeah,
schedule. And
I get
so,
that.
like, I just finished Stray, and I was like, that game stayed as long, like it stayed its welcome. Like it didn't overstay, it didn't try to drag anything out. It was just like a nice, well-contained experience that knew what it was trying to do and did it well. And I'm like, that's perfect. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
vignettes.
fair.
Think about vignettes. Like you are gazing through a window of an experience and you're just showing a small snippet of what a larger version of it could be, but it is still well contained within itself.
You may not have the
Don't.
resources to make a full Hollywood feature film, but you can maybe make a one scene movie if you want to put it in another context. Like you
Mhm.
don't
Oh,
you don't
now I think.
yeah, you don't scope down doesn't it can be in a technical level, but also just literally the length of the game itself. It might be considered like a vertical slice or an MVP, and that something you can build out on later on. But focus on the real condensed, concise core of the thing and make it in everything that it needs for itself, that and it's still in a cohesive way, but it does not have to be every single thing it could possibly be.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I think the thing that I've always had trouble with is that my ideas are way too big. I think a good example is when I was in high school. I legit wanted to make a game that spans 5 years, and I mean like in game, not real time. That would be terrifying. Like I guess 1,000 hours base, and I was like, this is gonna be my magnum opus. Realizing that after I think 5 projects in, I'm like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be.
Mhm.
Didn't did not think that high school me would be like, oh, why can't you make your game? Reality strikes.
I mean, Kentucky Route Zero is maybe like 10, 12 hours, and that took 8 years to make? 9 years to make?
Yeah. And the thing, and I guess, and I get that though. I'm using a simpler engine, but it's like, it's not anything, but it's still like complicated because I have to switch between engines in the middle of it too. So it's like
Mm,
going from engine to engine, trying to figure out what will work.
Yeah,
mhm.
I think,
what
I,
you're not seeing in a lot of those games is like the amount of times they've just scrapped an entire project and redone it again. Like the
yeah, sorry.
You're
yeah,
good.
no, go ahead.
I was saying, yeah, you're right. Because after realizing that I've gone through about 5 or 6, no, 5 or 6 projects at this point in a span of like 4 years or 5 years, actually, it's been like, wow, reality did strike me harder than like a sledgehammer to the face. It's surprising that after doing that, I actually understand it a bit better, which is why now that you say that, I need to just start plotting down just some simple ideas. I have a grand idea that I want to make, but I can just simple it down to just something concise now.
If it helps, like you can just find like a favorite part in like a game that you like, and you can maybe make something out of that. Like
I think,
I just played a game that was just like, what if we just took the inventory management from Resident Evil 4 and just made a bunch of puzzles using that only?
oh, that's fair. I think I've got my idea too. I think I've got my idea. I just need to figure out like how I'm going to implement it properly because I think I was also trying to do. I think another question that I had it was in the Q&A chat. I don't know if we had time to do that, but it was like story gameplay dissonance. Anyone like understand that
Mhm.
at all?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because that's what I wanted to really do with my game is basically give that connection where it's like what you do in the game can affect the story and vice versa. It'll actually like kind of like what is it? Least of the painful with the happiness and stuff like that.
Mm.
Yeah,
If
something like that.
I know there's always been a meme about for Bioware games, like the magical knife that will just like in cutscenes will just instantly one-hit kill anybody if you choose like the kill option.
Yeah, like that's like I think
In
that's
in in Mass Effect, it was like the magical pistol in cutscenes that would just kill like the NPC immediately, even though they're wearing like armor and would have shields on.
yeah, I guess that's what I also think about too. I try to make sure my game keeps some
That
consistency, but not to the
that's one
point
of
where it's
those
like,
that's one of those things where players will just kind of hand wave it away though.
yeah,
Like
I understand, but it's like I guess it's like maybe it's because I've seen a lot of videos on it too. Because I've basically been trying to trying to get in this industry ever since like I was, oh God, I think yeah, high school, beginning of high school. I was trying to get into the industry, and I was like, okay, so how am I going to make my game? How am I going to make my game stand out too? I have to have an idea. Yeah, I can. It doesn't have to be original, but it has to be something that can stick out to someone, and when they see it, it's like, oh, that's cool. You know,
Real quick, I'm
like,
just gonna jump in.
mhm,
I want to make sure
sorry.
that no, don't worry. I was just like I want to make sure that we're, Ashley, really thank you so much. I'm not saying we're ending it right now, but I just want you to know that, you know, whenever you need to go, feel free.
Yeah,
And if there were any like maybe parting words or sort of like
yeah,
summing up ideas.
Yeah. Actually, there was one I wanted to answer that I saw in the QA. The strange relationship between people trying to get into the industry and people in the industry. How do you avoid that? Please give me a job feeling. I think that is incredibly real, and I've been on both sides of that. Um, and I love that I chose to answer this because it's not an easy answer. But I I know that like especially as a developer, it's easy for me to tell when somebody wants something from me. Whether that's like, when people are like, hey, I'm just trying to get a feel for the culture of your team, it's like you're trying to look for a job. Like that's what you're looking for. And it's okay to ask for that. But it also is like I, I think the thing that the vibes like like the question says like the vibes you don't want to give off really comes from a place of curiosity and exploration of no approaching, especially when you're new to the industry, approaching it with the idea that you have no idea how any of this works. And not to say that that is an insult or anything. It is just that if you haven't done it before, you don't know how it works. And so approaching every conversation with a developer with a lot of curiosity and openness and being like and asking lots of questions and not just asking how it works, but how it feels and say like, well, how is your experience with that? And like, oh, what is the thing that you really love to make? Why do you like to make games? And being very um asking a lot of interesting questions and that you're probing not just like information about the industry, but why people love it is a way to make a connection with someone that doesn't feel like you're trying to prove your worth to them in that conversation. We're like, yes, this is why you should hire me because these are the skills I bring to the table. That should come up more organically. But if you always approach those relationships from a like, I'm not asking anything of you right now. I just want to know more about the industry. That that helps soften that relationship. If you are like if you present yourself in a way that you're genuinely curious and interested about all these different perspectives because no one developer has every perspective on the industry. Everybody sees it differently. It is the industry can often feel like a monolith, but I see it more as a giant pile of spaghetti. It is so messy and is so weird and like nobody does like you could have one expert in a company that's worked at one company for 15 years and they have no idea how they do it like at 3 4 10 other studios. There's no experts. There's no like, oh, I know everything that there is to know about game development. Everybody does it differently. um and so just approaching it with curiosity and those relationships are about like you saying, hey, I would like to get better, I would like to understand how to be better, rather than approaching it from a like, this is why you should hire me situation. Like, you definitely want to present yourself in a way like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is why I care. This is why I want to make games. This is why it matters to me. But you don't want to say like, this is why I'm great and you should hire me for these reasons, because then that can come across as like you think you know the job but you don't. So yeah, that I think that sort of softens that. But I do acknowledge that it is a very weird place to be, because you often do need a job and you're like, I do need to get hired. I do need employment. Um but just approaching it from like asking those questions and building relationships, because like I said, the industry is really small, and well, it's getting bigger now, but it feels small, especially if you go to a bunch of different studios, you go to industry events, you'll start to run into the same people. The relationships you build across the industry and the people you talk to and stay in touch with will affect your career in ways that you don't expect, in ways that you may not even know. Like, if someone worked with you, say on a student project, and they're at a company and they don't realize that you're applying at their company, they'd be like, oh yeah, that person's great, hire that person. Stuff that you may not even realize is happening behind the scenes. So it's just building relationships from a place of curiosity, and always wanting to learn more and express your passion for the industry and the art form. Yeah. Yeah, totally understand it. And like I remember having those feels like when I was looking for work and feeling like, what do I need to do to like actually get in the industry? And like I said, it is different. It is different for every single person. So there's no prescriptive way you get into the industry. There are lots of ways, and there are some that are more underhanded than others. Um, and getting into the industry is a weird thing to think, because there, like I said, there's no monolith. Like, you could start at a small company, you could start at a big company, you can start working QA for slots machines. Like, you could be on the legal team for, a mobile game. It's There's no one path, and no path should be discounted. And just because you're not doing the work that you want to be doing one day doesn't mean you're not gaining experience and gaining value from those experiences along the way. So, never looking down on positions is another tip I'd have. So, like I said, find your core, find the thing that you love to do, that drives you, and apply that to whatever positions you think will suit that.
There's just not many universals, so you just do have to be adaptable in a lot of
Yes.
ways for whatever you do, because so many things, not just through pipeline, workflow, standard scope, it's all going to be different. So being able to meet all those different situations means you will have more long-term success in the industry.
Yeah. You got to flow like water and just adapt to whatever your position you find yourself in, place you find yourself in, and that will set you up for success. And then, like I said, set you up for success in ways you didn't expect it to happen. Like, I did not expect to be where I am right now, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But I was flexible with how I saw myself and my career to be, and now I'm very happy I'm at where I'm at. But it wasn't like a long-term goal that I was able to set. It was just like, wherever I can fit, whatever is calling to me right now, I'm going to grab that. I'm going to move in that direction. And that gave me a lot of different perspectives and a lot of growth opportunities to explore where I could be. So, yeah.
And just like to the point about like making important connections that you never know where like
Go.
things could go in the future. I feel like Austin is such a good hub for that. I mean, Josh was
Go.
actually.
Thank you.
Are you heading out?
Yes.
Bye. Thanks for coming. Josh was actually the one who told me to go to that South by event, which was where I met you.
Yeah.
Like, literally a South by networking event, and I feel like there's like the ATX Game Makers group. I just feel like my sense is I don't have much of a reference point for this, but I feel like Austin is a good community to sort of be
Hmm.
to be an up and coming prospective developer. Do you feel like that is, as opposed to other cities or other places, does Austin feel like it has more of a like social fabric of game?
Yeah, I think Austin definitely has an indie scene and sort of a weird vibe to it, where it's like, yeah, I want to do this weird thing that I don't know if anybody's gonna like it, but I'm gonna do it. And it was like, yeah, do it, and just try it. There's the vibes, because I lived in San Diego, I lived in the Bay Area, and I lived here, and I lived in Chicago. In Chicago, there is a game scene there, but it's smaller. But in the Bay, it definitely was like, you need to prove why you're it, like you're the thing right now, and it was exhausting. But in Austin, it's just like, yeah, whatever your weird vibes are, yeah, bring them. Let's see it. Let's see your freak flag. Let's see the kinds of things that inspire you. It doesn't matter where they come from. Um, so I think, yeah, there's a lot of it's kind of like, COVID has affected everything, but like Juegos Rancheros and VR Austin and like um, Fantastic Arcade, like these are all really cool spaces to see these smaller games and experiences and see what kinds of stuff that people are just kind of, it's play. It feels more like play than a magnum opus. Um, and Austin is also a hub for a lot of game companies that, uh, like I said, aren't the big shiny, but they are doing, interesting things and can definitely be open to more junior developers. So yeah, yeah, I think Austin, and on top of it, I'd also say Austin is a nice place to look for a healthy work-life balance. I think in general that is extremely valued here compared to more West Coast cities, where the standard and the average has been more crunch culture in the past. Like I said, it's shifting, but here I think it's a little bit more standard to have a good work life balance.
It's good news.
Where would you recommend looking up resources on like this kind of thing? Because I did not know about Fantastic Arcade or any of those places until now.
Let me drop a link in the chat. Let me find a link. There's actually Game Dev Beer Night is a great resource. ATX Game Dev Calendar, that's managed by John Henderson, who's great. He where should I post these? Post them in resources.
Totally. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, here's one. ATX Game Dev Calendar. John posts, when events are happening, when there are talks, when there are game jams, that kind of thing. And then it hasn't happened in a while, but Game Dev Beer Night was like a monthly meetup where everybody would just go to a bar, hang out, a lot of developers, so you can like just kind of mingle with developers and chat about stuff. There is one on September 28th, next week. It's an ugly link. Hold on. There we go. Also hosted by John Henderson. He's great. Yeah, those are the top two ones. Also, if you are looking for jobs, or like if you just want to look at job listings and get a better idea of like what credentials or what experience they're looking for, I highly recommend Grackle HQ. Get a link for that. It is a job aggregate website that basically scrapes a bunch of different studios' job pages and is up to date as long as those jobs are still on the websites. But you can get an idea. You can filter by discipline. You can filter by location. Search by keyword. But it gives you a better idea of like what different roles are looking for. And I think, yeah, there's currently over 11,000 jobs on there right now. So, yeah, there's Twisted Pixel. That's in Austin. Right at the top there. Oh, and Oculus. Oculus is in Austin. Or no, that's Twisted Pixel. Right, they bought them. But yeah, it's a nice place to look at job listings, and it's also interesting too. I would love to see some like graphs of roles, because there were moments where nobody was hiring for cinematic designers, and then there were months where it's like everybody's hiring cinematic designers. Just like this feast and famine. And it's interesting to see where there are waves, like the more you pay attention to them, of when people are hiring and when they're not.
Thank you for sharing those links.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think there's I think financial quarters is definitely a part or a thing that affects it, because financial years end around April, March. So, you want everything to be delivered by that point to like work within the fiscal year. So like usually you get approved for jobs, or, opening up new listings like after that date. Um, but also I've seen tons of like layoffs in April, March too. So it's like, it's not consistent, but I think that the financial year and the financial quarters definitely affect that. Um, but yeah, also like where games are at in their dev cycles. Like if it's a 6-8 year project, they're going to throw a lot more money at it in the first 4 years than they are towards the end, unless they really need to get it out the door by a certain date, and then they'll get like a bunch of contractors. Like that's how I got started, was that SWOTOR really needed to go out the door and they needed contractors, and I'm like, throw me at the problem. So that's how I kind of got into the industry. Was being a last minute addition to the team to get it out the door. Well, I mean, I had a contract position as a cinematic designer, so I was building cutscenes on a contract. But I think it starts to move towards an implementation scripting. So if you're a contract designer, you're most likely you're not like building out ideas or having like the overarching vision, but they're like, hey, we have these 20 side quests that just need to get scripted, and that just takes time and brain. And they're like, we need someone to slot in to do that scripting, to make sure that this works, that it's stood up, and that it actually functions, and then polish it out. So there you can definitely get design positions that are contract. They're just more implementation than they are creative direction.
It definitely is interesting hearing about more and more about game writing, because my first time through college I did film. So like when we did screenwriting, we got taught specifically the 5 co's, which is that a story has to be complete, compelling, coherent, cohesive, and concise, in that order. But the first part of that is complete. If it's not finished, nobody's going to see it. It doesn't matter. And realizing how much of that still translates from film to game, it's just the definition for concise and the definitions for compelling are massively different, because with film you just have narrative genre.
Mm-hmm.
With games you have technical genre, like the actual mechanic of the genre, as well as narrative genre, where it be horror or sci-fi or action. And having that be a much broader constraint makes it more challenging, I think, in most ways to write, because you're never just writing something in a vacuum. You're never, because of a movie, you just watch the movie. Game, someone has to actually interact with it. You can't fail watching a movie. You can fail playing a game. It's not like if you don't understand the theme of Empire Strikes Back by Act 2, the movie shuts off. That doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting having that as a constraint, but like you said, having some constraints and structure can actually be more liberating when it comes to writing, because it's like now that's the limitation. You can work within that instead of having that choice hanging over your head. But what if I chose not to do it that way?
Mm-hmm.
And broke free of that structure, and that's the thing I'm encountering with it too.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. a lot of people coming from screenwriting and film and moving into games, and some games that are trying to be films. And I don't necessarily think those are bad, but I don't think they're taking advantage of the medium as much as they could. Like the narratives in games is like a Rube Goldberg machine. You're like, I'm just setting it off, and we'll see if we get to where we were supposed to go. But like I said, like I think it's liberating and it's fun because it's like it's more like a science experiment. You're like, you poke the thing and it moves and you're like, ooh, fascinating. And you write that down. You're like, what if I did it this way? And you're playing around less with like having a very strict, like, this is exactly what I want the entire thing to do, and more like, how can I create a toy that gives people options on how they feel about things, or gives them an option of how they experience this, because ultimately games are about interactivity and play and role playing. And I think that's a really cool place to be, because on one hand it's terrifying because you're like, I'm writing for an audience that I will never sit down with and play the game with, so I can't necessarily assume I can't predict what they're going to feel. But it's also kind of exciting because you're like, oh, they could interpret what I made in a way that I didn't even see, as possible. I knew a bunch of the guys that made Octodad, and they just made it as like, oh, funny octopus man in a suit, and he just walks around and everything is hard. And somebody came to them later and says like, this was really emotionally impactful for me, as sort of an extension of alcoholism. And this feeling of like, I struggle to do things like regular things day to day, but the family in Octodad never judges him, never says like, why are you knocking everything off the table, or never says like, oh, that's, why are you acting this way? They just accept him and love him as he is, as his octopus self. And they gleaned this value from that narrative, the way they structured it in a way that the developers definitely did not anticipate. So yeah, it's scary and it's exciting to build a narrative in a way that you don't know how it ends or how it's going to be interpreted on the other end.
That was one of the things, first lessons we got taught in our game design 1 class, is you can't control what the player is going to be doing at all times. So the most you can do is make sure that whatever they do isn't boring. And
Yeah.
that's sort of the overarching rule of game design. And same thing with story. You can't always make sure that not everybody's going to be as invested in every type of story equally, but you can at least make it compelling enough for almost everyone to have something of interest to draw them in and keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, communicating affordances early on of like, how branchy is this? How much influence do I have on this story or on these characters? Making that really clear. Players will play within the affordances, and nobody's gonna complain that, if they're given the scope of what they can affect, they're not gonna say, why is it not this other kind of game? Because no, this is what this kind of game is. These are the kinds of choices. This is kind of the level of interaction and experience that you can expect. Yeah. So yeah, it's just being able to communicate that players will still enjoy the game, even if it has constraints and limitations. They get to play within those constraints. But yeah, I think I'm good. That's probably my time, but I really appreciated talking with y'all. This was very fun.
Thank you so much for coming, Ashley. Seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And you're
I'm
welcome
happy.
to stay in the server if you want.
Thank you.
You don't
Sure.
have to, but open invitation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chill and won't always be on, but happy to lurk for a bit.